My guest today is author and entrepreneur Sam LaCrosse. Sam's approach to living a rich and fulfilling life does not involve cookie-cutter slogans or self-esteem dogma. The path to a good life lies in discovering and honoring your own core beliefs. In today's episode, we talk about his new book, Value Economics, the study of identity, which leads you to true self-discovery. Welcome to Lifeology.
Thanks, James. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me, man.
I am looking forward to this. It's funny when I was telling you the pre-call when your publicist sent me the information, you were like, this is not a self-help book, et cetera. I'm like, it's going to be a self-help show, but I love it because I know your book is a precursor to people when they do the self-help book. So it's going to be a fantastic show for people to get a full spectrum of how to approach any new philosophy and how to just figure out who they are in general.
For sure. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. And I think it's going to be an interesting dialogue between the two of us.
I agree. So now you're in Austin, Texas right now. How did you, because once again, when I was reading more information about you, you're like, I'm just an average person. I'm this, I'm that, I'm this. Why is that? How is that how you brand yourself? Because I understand the concept of it, but help my listeners and viewers understand the concept for you.
Yeah, for sure. And I think we have to start out with a dedication of the book, and I dedicate the book to those who tell the truth. And I don't think that anything I say in all of that segment is wrong. Like, a lot of people don't know who I am. I'm surprised you know who I am. And the only reason you did is because my publicist reached out to you. So I think I kind of come from that with, a couple of perspectives. And the first one is that I want to tell the truth. I want to be honest. I'm really, I'm 24 years old. I'm just getting my start in the world. Haven't really made a name for myself that much. So wanted to just kind of put myself out there from that perspective. And I think also a lot of people are coming from that perspective too. They might not feel as seen as some other people. They might feel, I don't want to say insignificant, but they might not feel that, a lot of their problems are isolated or they're not kind of, immersed in a lot of other people. But I could be those people. You could be those people. Many people could be those people. Yeah. So I think that, coming in from that perspective, and also, I always like kind of rooting for the underdog. I root for the Browns, and the Browns have been the underdog for like my entire life. Yeah. So it's, I kind of have a situation where it's like, I like rooting for people like myself, where I'm kind of coming at it from a unique perspective, and not a lot of people have heard of me, but hopefully after this interview, and again, thank you for having me, we'll kind of hopefully change that and get some help to people.
Oh my gosh, my pleasure. And I really appreciate that because like you said, we perhaps some people see me on this side of the mic or can see you on this side of the mic as well. And they can perceive a certain idea, but they don't really know the journey of how we got here. I know my journey itself was didn't have all this, didn't have my audience. It was not that way at all. And so for many people, so I really appreciate you coming from approach of someone who isn't yet there. I'm not saying you're not there, but as far as the your audience, as far as just, I don't want to say starting, but really finding their way and finding who they truly are so that they can create that platform, whatever that may look like for them. So I really do appreciate your approach. So I do, like I said, I do appreciate that. Now, what was it for you that wanted you to say, okay, I want to write this book, Value Economics, the study of identity?
So it was a couple things. And I think it was, and I write about this in the introduction of the book, What Came Before. And I kind of talked about, it started, the genesis of this whole conversation I had with myself and hopefully with the people who pick up this book is the genesis of kind of belief. And it came from a conversation I had with my mother. And I remember having it, I think in my junior year of college. So this is probably somewhere around February, middle of 2019. So about 3 or 4 years ago at this point. And I was talking with her about, beliefs and what people kind of talk about and how we believe in things. And then she just kind of, I don't know how we got on the topic specifically, but she said, Sam, people your age, they really don't believe in anything. And I said, well, okay, well, one, first of all, is that true? And two, if that's true, why is that true? And so I did some digging, and I kind of came to the concept of values, which, especially by my father, it was hammered into me from a very young age. Literally every single day, he would find a way to just throw it in there, like the most, like when we were like, he's beating the shit out of me in Godzilla or something on like my early GameCube or something like that. He'd throw something in about, you got to stick to your values. We'll play into this game, Sam, or something like that, or whatever. But so that concept was always, around and constantly being hammered in by my parents, my grandparents. I had a very supportive family environment. And so I kind of made the connection there between values and belief, because I think they're very, very intertwined topics. And so in terms of the economics piece, I had the conversation with my mom. And so I began thinking of it, and I began thinking about value and sacrifice. And so I think there's a relationship between those two things, because I think the more you sacrifice to get something, the more you value that something, and the inverse is also true. And so I had to take an economics class in my final year of college to graduate. And so I was a finance major in college. I had to take a large economics class and advanced economics class to graduate. And I say in the first part of my book, I'm far from an economist. I barely graduated with a finance degree. I almost failed out of college. But, so I have kind of all these things, so I'm in this class, I'm seeing that we're just doing basic supply and demand curves and stuff like that. And I said, wait a second. This is a relationship between two things, whether that can be to supply and demand or quantity and price or something. And I related that back to the value and sacrifice thing. I'm like, oh my God, that's a relationship between two things. So I did not know how to formulate those two ideas, but I said, okay, here's a very basic model. It's two lines connected at one point, which is there, and then the two lines going across one another and intersecting. So I said, okay, if they can do that with two hard principles, why can't I try to use that same concept to explain how to come up with values? And so I had started a blog in the start of 2020, and I had the idea for this post. So this is actually kind of my first actual post. I had hey, I have a blog now post, but this is my actual first blog post. It's since been taken. So it's since been taken down now, but that was kind of the first one where I really kind of explained a concept in terms of relating your personal set of core values to economics. And I did it, and I thought, well, that was kind of cool and interesting. So that was Value Economics, then Chapter 1. It's now Chapter 4 in the book. But then I said, okay, next month, let's do Chapter 2 and see what happens. And then that became Chapter 3, and then Chapter 4, and then Chapter 5. And so I stopped around Chapter 6 or 7 sometime in the middle of the summer of 2020. And that's when I began to formulate the idea and said, I might have something here. And then October of 2020, I committed to writing the book. I got the deal with Scribe Media in December of 2021 after I had finished, and now I'm here. So that's kind of how the process all unfolded on itself.
Wow. It's always interesting to me to see the journey because everyone has a different route with their journey. And so to hear yours, your mom said that one thing that people in your generation don't really have values. It's interesting. So the way I look at things is we have our morality, then our values, et cetera. So it starts from the morality. And from kids from up until age of 9 is when we're taught our morals. And so a really famous psychologist, Erik Erikson, has all these different stages of development. And so he proposed, or he postulated that up until 9 years old, we're taught our morals based off of our family system. So every system, every family has its own culture. And so our culture is our family. And then let's say if it's a religion, if people have the same religion, then that family culture is one, and then the religion is another, and it gets bigger and bigger. So it becomes the society of things. And so it is important that many people don't realize that how they look at the world is really based off up until they're 9 years old, because the parents teach them how they punish them or they reward them, et cetera. And so with that, so you'll find, it's interesting when we look at a parallel aspect of the different generations. This is my own nerdiness coming out here, but
I love it.
But it comes down to, a couple generations above me, that as far as your mother's as well. So it's going to be what your parents, what they taught you, and then how that rolls out. So your dad, your parents had a really good, strong values and morals with that. And so because of that, now you're really able to teach your own generation for individuals who weren't able to perhaps get some of those morals the way that your family instilled with you as well. So this book is going to be a fantastic way to really connect with your audience.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree with that. I think, and to your point about what Erikson studied, I think in the first chapter, so I basically go from literally from the ground up in terms of what is a value? How do you create a single individual value? And so it starts literally from I had to dumb it down both for myself and hopefully for a lot of people to kind of understand where I'm coming from here. And so what you said about Erik Erikson in terms of just kind of what they were exposed to at a young age. So there are four factors of production in any economic system. There's the land, there's the labor, there's the capital, and there's the entrepreneurship. And so the land is literally the ground, the raw material. It is what you build out of the ground or something else. So when I was creating that chapter and starting from the ground up, I said, okay, what could be the land in a value? What is the land in a value? And to your point, I said, with Erik Erikson, it's our experiences. I think it's how we were raised. It's how we brought up. It's what we saw. It's kind of who we looked up to, where we were around growing up. So I'm far from a psychologist or a professional of any kind, but I think our values and our morality, to your point, are very, very intertwined in a lot of those things, and especially in our experiences. So I think without having experiences and only siphoning from those experiences to kind of, I would say, derive everything else from, I think that's about as good of a starting point as any, which is why I started with that in the book.
I really like how you liken an economic standpoint and you connect that to an abstract thought or abstract concept. It's really interesting because sometimes people struggle with that. So it makes sense to me when you say our experiences like the land. What is it about the book when you talk about the study of identity? Explain that more to me.
So yeah, it's a good question. I think it's a question that a lot of us, especially in recent times, have struggled with. I think, I can't speak for obviously for your generation or whatever, but I'm talking more specifically about Gen Z. Like I said, I'm only 24 years old. And I see a lot of people my age, because I live in Austin, Texas, one of the biggest young professional, exploding places in the United States. And I see a lot of people talking about and having conversations about identity, but I don't think we're really connecting the two dots together. I don't really think I think there's something missing inside of the gambit, because there's been a lot of talk about identity recently, whether that's your sexuality, your gender identity, your race, your whatever you kind of have around it. And so I do think those things are important components of identity, but I do think that there is something more to that people are missing. And I think you cannot look at a group and distill it down to an individual, because a group is made out of a series of individuals. Correct. And so I said, okay, we're thinking about this in the collective context, which is very important, because we do need to have a collective identity as a country, as a city, as a company, as a whatever. Society. But we also need to be a series of individuals first. And I thought the individual was kind of getting parsed out of the overall equation of identity in favor of the really large group identities. And some of that, like I said, is valid with all the stuff that's going on in society recently. But I think it has to start at the individual level. And I think a lot of our generation is lost at the individual level, because we're so conflated with a lot of either what people say or what we observe in terms of group identity that we've ignored the individual identity. And I believe the best way to form your identity, from my experience and from what I say in the book, is through your individual values and your individual value systems that forge who you are as a person. And I alluded earlier to my family, my parents, especially my grandparents, and they have lived very, very, I think, successful lives, because they're not perfect people. No one's a perfect person, but they've lived a life that I think I'm envious of, because I kind of wanted a lot of what they had. And they have lived, I think, a very, very solid life. And they've told me that before. And they said, not a lot of people have really experienced what we've experienced before. And the way we got there was through our values. And so I said, and I think to kind of go off on a side tangent a little bit, people can explain values in abstract, but as I mentioned before, really no one can. When I ask people, what is a value? I don't think a lot of people, I couldn't answer the question. So I don't know if a lot of people could, say what a value is. And so I'm like, okay, because when a motivational speaker or whatever, they get on the stage and say, you've got to start with your values. And then the crowd shouts back at him, what is that? And so we just don't really know all of the other, I just don't think we knew how to connect the dots. So I'm thinking, okay, there's a gap in the understanding here. So how can I both solve that problem and then lead to us having more individualized identities that can form a collective identity as a group that can really kind of coexist with one another better?
Define what is a value for our audience today.
So I would say, and kind of going everything else, a value is something that is scarce, a value that is something that is personal to you, and a value is something that is of importance to you. So it is really, because value is in a sense arbitrary, because let's just say we're talking about colors. Let's just say your favorite color is black and I say my favorite color is white. Those obviously are different types of things. So, I mean, there is going to be a polarity and a difference between a lot of people. And I say in the first chapter that no matter what kind of value system you adopt, you are going to naturally polarize people. And that's okay, because you do need to live to what is important to you, and you need to be truthful and honest with yourself about that. But you also need to be aware that other people might have different important things that they value, whether that is a favorite color, whether that is what they do for a living, whether that's how they treat their children, or cheat their spouse, or not cheat their spouse, and don't do that. Treat their spouse and do all these other things. So it's kind of different how we perceive importance and how we perceive true scarcity and true value in the sense of ourselves. So I think that it's a lot of kind of introspection and a lot of ways to enact that introspection with your actions into real life.
When a person really can understand their values and can really identify them, and then they live that, how does that change their lives? So with this, prior to them having this knowledge versus post knowledge, what's the juxtaposition between that then and now? What would be different for them? So I think the red pill analogy is very overused, but it's kind of like, when you don't have something that you can anchor your life on, you're naturally going to float. You're going to float, whether that's a boat, whether that's, however you're going to. If you are not tied down to something, you are going to float away and do all these other things. And what I see happen is, let's just use the boat example, for instance. The boat is not tied down at the dock. It floats away, and then it's at the mercy of the ocean, because the ocean or the lake or whatever dictates the water. It's just kind of the natural way of things. So when an individual person does not have something anchoring them down, they float.
And then they ultimately, I think, get held hostage or get captured by a larger force that may or may not be good for them and may or may not align with their values. So you're either going to have, I think, your system of values, or you will naturally be progressed to conform to another opinion of someone else who can enforce something on you, whether that's kind of either a crazy conspiracy theory cult or kind of a company or something else that you can kind of either say, okay, I want to be part of this crazy conspiracy cult because of my core values. Yeah. Or I do not want this thing, and I actually have a direction that I want to chart with my life. So whether it's, and again, it goes about what is important to you. And if you can't answer what is valuable to you, what is important to you, then I think a lot of stuff is going to be really, really hard for you to answer, and you will end up at the mercy of somebody else.
Yeah. Reading more about your book, like I said at the very beginning of this, it talks about, a lot of the self-help world teaches very cookie cutter things. And I'm obviously part of the self-help world, but you're right. A lot of them do. You read this book, you do these 5 steps, and all of a sudden your life will change. And many people have tried that. Right. And for some people that's worked really well. But one thing you're really saying about your book is every person has to identify that for themselves. Yes, the steps may work, but you can't really get the steps unless you really know who you are, because since it's not a cookie cutter aspect of it, I have to understand my values and what works for me, what makes sense for me as James, the individual.
Yes.
And once I understand that, then I can try and use one of these templates, and it may or may not work, but I'd have to tweak it to such a degree that it fits into my paradigm or my worldview or my values to see if that would actually work. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that part of it was very, very crucial. And that was honestly the hardest part for me, because, okay, I'm telling but it's like, am I doing the same thing as the people I'm calling out for doing the same thing as I'm doing? And the way I chose to combat that was using kind of, like I said earlier, those economic principles that have existed in hundreds and hundreds of years, that have been worked to test over time and to work in terms of economic systems, and relate them over to those models. So we have some kind of sustainable, repeatable process that is grounded in a type of science, in this case, economics. So I think that, you have to start from that point. And I think, honestly, I've been thinking about this a lot over the past couple of days. Let's just say 1,000 people buy my book and people take it 1,000 different ways. I think that is a good thing. I think that's a good thing, because that shows kind of, people are taking it they're internalizing it. They're absorbing the information, and they're saying, okay, this is my first sense about myself, and I can follow these rules and these principles. And I think that's transferable, whether it's work hard and you'll be rewarded, be nice to people and people will probably be nice to you back. And I kind of wanted to reach that type of an axiom where it's really not anything that's too, unobvious. Like, people are like, oh, wow, this is a massive revelation in my life. I'm really not saying many things that are new, but what I think I am saying that is potentially refreshing is that you need to honor the core of who you are first. Correct. And then you can make those decisions, because after that, then you will really kind of have an authentic grasp of what your reality can look like going into the future.
Who are the people that you want to read this book? What's the readership look like?
So I think it can be applicable to most everybody, because I think it's a good thing when everybody has their individual set of values. But going back to the Gen Z point, I think a lot of young people, they were either raised to either not I think I got a unique situation growing up, because I was raised where values were very, very important with my family. And and I think that, I was very, very blessed about that. I was very, very fortunate to have that kind of happen to me. And I think that it's just kind of been, again, just pushed to the side in our cultural conversation about how we're talking about certain things or how we talk to each other. And I think that going back and honoring those things is something that Gen Z, I don't think, is very good at yet. And we're just starting out. We're kind of getting really kicked into everything else. Like I said, we're not going to be the masters of the universe quite yet. We're not the CEOs of companies. We're really not not people with massive podcast platforms, anything like that, national syndicated radio shows, but we're going to be. And the reality of the situation is we are going to inherit the earth at some point. And so when we inherit the earth, we have to ask ourselves, what's that going to look like? Are we going to be a system that all kind of, or I would say a collective of society that all is pushed by groupthink and everything else that may or may not work for the individual person? And are we going to be authentic with how we convey ourselves? Or are we going to be just kind of photocopies of one another that really kind of, pass out to one another on the street? So I think that it's better that people know who they are before they inhabit those positions of influence, of power, of everything like that. And I'm not saying I'm fully there yet. And I'm saying in the book that you need to constantly, reiterate on this stuff and really go back and see if it still matches up to who you are as a person, have perspective on those things. But I think that Gen Z really kind of needs to wake up and see that this is an important thing and that it's being ignored, and it can't be ignored, because I think it's really important.
Certainly. It certainly is. Now, when people hear all this, some people might think, okay, well, this is more of a workbook. This is it's a manifesto. What kind of book how would you describe the book?
So I was talking to you earlier in the pre-call about this. I want this book to be positioned as the book everyone should read before they pick up any self-help book ever. Yeah. Because I think, again, I say the book is accomplishing two problems. I said this when I announced the book, or it's going to answer two questions, I should say. Who are we? And how can you help yourself if you can't answer question A? So when you're trying to help yourself, if you're helping yourself for the wrong reasons because you don't know who you are, I don't think that's helping yourself. I don't think it's helping anybody. Right. I think it's kind of, if you're going in a wrong direction and you say you're quote unquote helping yourself, you're indirectly lying to yourself about what you might really need. And what you might really need is probably going to be pretty important if you think you need to, seek out help for it or buy my book or thankfully or do something else. Mm-hmm. So I think that, I want it to serve as something like, okay, I've answered all these essential questions about myself. I know who at least a little bit better. The water's gotten a little less cloudy of who I am as an individual. And then I can kind of parse out whether I need improvements in my romantic relationships, in my social relationships, in my work life, in my family life, and everything like that. I need to honor who I am first. And so before I need to help myself, I need to answer that question first. So I would say to anyone who is really kind of seeing that they're lacking in some way or another and wants to improve themselves, and I always encourage people to do that because I want people to get better. I don't want people to get worse. I want people to really just see that, okay, I need to do some groundwork before I need to lay the foundation before I build the house. Mm-hmm.
In your focus group or in your study group or people who've already read this book, have you had any reviews thus far?
So I've kept it pretty tight-lipped at this point. Like I don't think a lot of people, I think the count was around 15 or 20 people before I officially announced it, other than my publisher, obviously. Yeah, of course. And I reached out to a couple of the gentlemen on the back of my book who all endorsed my book. And thankfully they did. Paul Reeder, Seth Kramer, Doug Farron, and Paul Hooker. All three of them are Ohio State University professors where I went to school. And the other is the founder of a charity that I support called Rally Cap Sports. And so I handed over to all of them. And I think the biggest compliment and the biggest piece of feedback I got was from my editor, actually, because when I submitted it to my editor for my first look over on Scribe, I went in, it's basically, we'll see you in 6 weeks and we'll come back with our first revision. Yeah. And so when my publishing manager, Elise, when she sent me over, hey, we have your feedback on your first draft, I just wanted to kind of say like, okay, I hope there's nothing seismically wrong with what I did. So like, I just don't want there anything like if I had to rewrite the book, because I stripped this thing down to the studs. I really, really edited it hardcore. So I'm like, that's going to be really disappointing if I have to take any of this stuff out. But the thing that I saw that was very, very enlightening with all of this, and he is a guy who I who I believe thinks very, very differently from me on a lot of things and everything else. And he said, Sam, I think you wrote a really great book. I read the book. I really, really enjoyed it. And it's probably not for me, but it's something I would give to my son. And it's something that I think my son would read. Excellent. And so I'm like, okay, like, yes, like we got it. Like, I mean, that's kind of that was a really, really encouraging piece of feedback. And I think that when I posted, the announcement for the book, I posted the introduction on my blog, and I posted it on my podcast that I have. A lot of people who listened to it and read it, I all got very, very positive feedback for them. And that was really the first mass exposure I got to a lot of people who were my age, who were on the younger spectrum of things. And they all said, like, wow, this is really, really cool. It's cool that you wrote a book, first of all. But it's also cool that you're talking about these types of things. And in doing other interviews like we're doing right now and talking to people and saying like, okay, this is what I wrote. This is kind of what my ideas flushed out for. And, that was, and I got two really other major pieces of validation that we could talk about. But I would say that one was the one that really kind of hit home for me.
And that's fantastic, because that really hits the mark of what you're looking for, is to the Gen Z or anyone else really to just really be able to find their core values, to really understand that. So I think it's a fantastic, wonderful review you got. Unfortunately, our time is up. We could talk all day. If my viewers and listeners want to find out more information about you and to purchase your book, one more time, Value Economics, The Study of Identity, where they find all this information online?
Yes, of course. So it's going to be out on June 28th, 2022. So the Amazon link will be posted on Amazon, barnesandnoble.com, and paperback, hardcover, and ebook. And you can find me on LinkedIn at Sam LaCrosse, LaCrosse, and on Instagram, Real Sam Lax, RealSamLax. And I will be posting content from the book, from the responses to the book, all throughout the next week. And again, it's coming out on Tuesday, June 28th.
Wonderful. My viewers and listeners also know that this show syndicates for many years to come. So if you watch this show after that mark, simply go to any of the places he told you about and you can purchase the book there. Sam, thank you so much for a wonderful guest on my show today. We'll talk soon.
Thanks, James. Appreciate it, man.